Hi everyone, Vanessa had 50 symptoms and discovered some surprising solutions to CFS, Long Covid and Insomnia. She talks about what supported her recovery, what helped her symptoms disappear in an hour or two, and offers her top tips for anyone dealing with CFS and Long Covid. So without further ado, let's dive in and meet Vanessa. Hello Vanessa.
Hi, Simon. Thank you so much for having me on the channel. I am really delighted to be here and sharing my story.
Fantastic. And it's lovely to have you here. And tell us first where you are in the world.
So I'm originally from Germany, but I am located in Scotland these days.
Okay, amazing. So let's get into it. How did it all start? Where did it begin?
So in hindsight, it all began in 2016. So at that time, I was in my third year in university here in Scotland. So I had moved here from Germany completely on my own to study political science. And I had also just broken up with my ex-boyfriend. We were together for over 2 years, and it ended up being quite an abusive relationship. So at that time, I contracted glandular fever, which is caused by Epstein-Barr virus. So I was ill for probably 8 to 12 weeks, quite unwell, but I then never recovered. So I started getting prolonged fatigue, problems with my memories, sort of struggling in university. And it wasn't so bad that my whole life came crashing down, but it was bad enough for me to sort of seek medical help. And I went from doctor to doctor, aside of sort of the glandular fever. They couldn't find anything. So they were just telling me, okay, it can take time to recover from this. Just take it easy. It will all be fine. However, it wasn't quite fine. Like my fatigue got sort of worse and worse. I mean, I stayed in university, but I started struggling more and more to the extent that I needed to postpone exams, rest a huge amount of my days. And it was just, it wasn't great. So I was certainly struggling in life. Um, by chance, I went to Germany to visit my family, and it was actually a GP there who had seen this before and said, "Look, I think you've got chronic fatigue syndrome." So that was sort of the first time this was ever mentioned to me. However, no sort of management strategies or treatments were suggested aside of radical rest. So that is sort of how it started, and that went on for probably another 1.5 years. Again, not so bad that I had I had to stop working or had to stop university, but it was certainly interfering with my life. And then something very interesting happened. I graduated in June 2018 with my master's degree, and I then started my career and also started weightlifting. So like really getting into fitness and looking at new hobbies. And the CFS almost went into remission. So it was at that stage extremely mild. Yeah, it's at that time I didn't really had an explanation for it. I didn't really know about neuroplasticity, TMS, or the mind body stuff. So I just thought, okay, it's gone, and that was sort of the end of it until I caught COVID.
Okay, so tell us about that. When did you get COVID and what was your experience of it?
Yes, so I must have caught COVID around Christmas 2020, so still fairly early on in the pandemic, before I had the chance to have any vaccinations. So at that time, several things happened. So my mother is a healthcare practitioner, so she actually worked on the COVID wards in a hospital in Germany. So she contracted COVID around the same time and ended up in ICU. She luckily made a recovery. However, my grandmother was infected and passed away. So all of this happened at the same time that I had my infection here in the UK, just by coincidence. And
Right.
to this day, I believe me getting COVID combined with the stress of worrying for my mother and then grieving for my grandmother is
Yeah.
sort of what has set everything off. I
Yeah.
mean, when I think about my infection, it was bad. So I would say it was definitely the worst illness I've ever had, but nothing that would suggest sort of long-term damage to my body. I had really bad flu-like symptoms for about 10 days. And then I never really caught a break. I know that some people with long COVID, they sort of have a little break where they feel okay. And then like the long COVID symptoms set in. But for me, it was almost immediate. But to be honest, that time is a little blurry because I was so shell-shocked to what had happened to my grandmother that I sort of tried, or I couldn't distinguish what of my symptoms was sort of a broken heart, grief, and what was actually like long COVID or COVID symptoms at the time. So for the 2-3 weeks after my grandmother passed away, I was just sort of in a limbo. I can actually now barely remember anything from that time. But I then started getting sort of really obvious and concerning symptoms that sort of started when after her funeral. So
and sorry to hear about that loss, so
thank you. And it is something that to this day I'm still sort of processing. So we were extremely close.
I can imagine.
So
and I was just going to say, you raise an important point, which is there's the COVID, but then there was also the stresses from that loss and your mum being unwell and losing your grandmother. And so, that's important to consider that, there might be more than one thing going on.
Yes, and like I will tell you a bit more about this later, but there's actually some other realizations about my lifestyle that I had during my recovery journey. But I mean, what sort of happened in these early few months of what I didn't know at the time was long COVID. I mean, it was barely spoken about at that time. You sort of started hearing the first reports about it. But, everyone just said, oh, COVID is so new. It wasn't even, circulating for a year. So no one had really any idea what will it do long-term to the body, how long it will take to recover. And that's sort of what my GP said at the time. I mean, I went to them about 3-4 weeks after my infection, and they weren't worried. So they were like saying, okay, look, this is just what happens. We hear this all the time after COVID. So it might take you a few months to recover. And they left it at that. But at the same time, like my symptoms starting to become more and more concerning. It started sort of, I'm wearing actually a fitness tracker, and that was a huge part of the puzzle at the beginning for me. So I was constantly dizzy, and I would then get sort of notifications on my watch that my heart rate was dangerously high. And whenever I checked, my heart rate was close to 200. It was quite a frightening experience. So that went on, off, to the extent that I went to a GP then, and they said, okay, let's take an X-ray of your chest, so of your lungs, and also an echocardiogram of your heart and an ECG to see what's going on. And itself, there was no damage to be found. All they could say is, look, you have tachycardia. There is nothing we can do.
Yeah, and just to be clear, were you getting that high heart rate from doing activity, or was it resting? What was the situation?
Anything. It was literally just standing up.
Right, gosh.
This is what I learned later is POTS. But that was another few months down the line until actually someone officially diagnosed me at the time. But that is sort of what went on in the beginning. And then it was almost like a switch had been flipped in my brain. That is the best way to describe it for me. From one to the other night, I completely stopped sleeping. So I just couldn't sleep anymore at all. So it would either be an hour or like little cat naps, but I almost lost the ability to sleep. And then I would constantly get panic attacks. I tried to explain this to a doctor back then and say, look, I know I've just lost my grandmother and everything, but this does not feel like anxiety in the sense that my mind is racing. It is bodily anxiety, like I'm getting pumped with caffeine and adrenaline. It's just my body is in an absolute state. And again, all I was offered was, well, we don't know what this is. Take an antidepressant and you will be better. So I did not have the best experience with doctors in this. So I think this is a fairly common theme with people, not to sort of be well received by the medical model.
Yeah. And so when did that start, the insomnia?
I would say about 3-4 weeks after my initial infection was over and my grandmother passed away.
Right.
And I can honestly say from there on, for the next 2-3 months, it would just go downhill day by day. And I would get, at the beginning, I was a bit worried, but I still sort of, I don't want to call it sanity, but I still had a bit of my sanity. Let's call it that. I was still sort of optimistic that this may fade away, considering everything that had happened. But that started getting more difficult day by day, more less sleep I was getting, and the more panicky I felt. The more difficult I found it to stay rational about all of this. And that, as I said, went on for another 2-3 months, just getting worse. And at that time, actually, again, something quite important happened in my journey. I found brain retraining. So I can say it right from the top. I am not one of those people that found brain retraining and lived happily ever after a few months of illness. Unfortunately, it wasn't like this for me. However, I did a brain retraining program about 5 months after these symptoms started, 4-5 months after these symptoms started. And it was sort of my first introduction to what could be going on, so that the nervous system and the brain could be involved in keeping sort of sickness behavior going. And it made sense to me at the time, and I really wanted to put my trust in it. So I did a 3-day course, which was quite helpful to me. But I then I've seen sort of little glimpses of, okay, there seems to be a point, because I had like these moments where I suddenly snapped out of it and for an hour or two felt okay. So there was definitely, I was onto something. But for me and sort of the personality that I have, the brain retraining program basically told me to do a certain process over and over and over again. Whenever I feel a symptom or have a negative thought or a thought around the symptom. And for me, that just added anxiety. It was for me a constant hypervigilance. And I sort of did it for a couple of weeks, and then I completely crashed.
Sorry to hear that. And have you any kind of sense of what it was? There is this notion that we experience anxiety because of something we're saying to ourselves. Do you have any sense of what you might have been saying to yourself consciously or subconsciously to generate anxiety?
I mean, I have a theory about why this happened. So let's go to the crash event and let me talk about it. It was quite it was a very difficult time for me, because this is basically what catapulted me from it being bad to it being extremely severe and me like completely losing touch to everything basically. So at that time I was sort of trying to do the brain retraining for maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks, and I had seen little glimpses of hope. And what had happened that day is it was for the first time in months I was going to visit a colleague of mine for some tea in the garden. I thought it would be a great exercise for me to try and re-expose myself to the world. I had a great time, was sitting in the sun all day, chatting away to my colleague, actually telling her all about the program I was doing, because she was really worried about me, about what was going on. I went home that night. I remember ordering myself some pizza, eating it, and I started feeling a bit funny, sort of in the sense that I started feeling flushed and warm. And the last few moments that I remember is me going to the bathroom, trying to sort of put cold water in my face, looking in the mirror, and my whole vision started going slowly. Everything started spinning and my whole vision started going. So I knew something was going to happen in a few seconds. So I tried to get out of the bathroom. I made it into the living room. And my partner at the time, I remember saying, I don't feel so good. And that was the last thing I remember. I then passed out and had a seizure.
Gosh.
Yeah.
What happened next?
So I have a bit of a gap there for a couple of minutes, but I remember sort of faintly him screaming, "What the hell is happening?" and him being on the phone to the emergency department, and he called an ambulance. And I sort of remember coming around, and no ambulance was actually inside. They actually told my partner that no ambulance was available for the next 2 hours and to monitor me. So I was sort of like lying on the floor in absolute shock and fear when I came around, shaking, not knowing what was going on, started to cry, started to scream. It was an absolutely terrifying experience. And I was just sort of, my boyfriend put me on the sofa. I was just lying there for the next few hours until I got a call to say that, the ambulance wouldn't be coming, but that I should report to my GP the next day to get assessed of what had happened.
Gosh, that's shocking. Were we in lockdown at this point, or what was the...
We were in the second big lockdown.
Right.
So it was obviously, hospitals were full. I sort of understand this, but this was an extremely frightening experience to me. And to this day, I believe maybe if the emergency service would have come and told me, okay, maybe, this was just from stress or whatever, or get me checked out in hospital, maybe I could have calmed down. But what actually happened was completely the opposite. So I called the GP the next day. I was still in a state. I was in an absolute, how could I say? I was numb and frozen, but sort of oscillating between this shutdown state to this fight or flight state constantly. So I would be shut down and disassociated, and in the next moment, I would be shaking with fear and panic. So I was constantly going between both. But I went to the GP. They actually did give me an urgent referral to neurology because I needed to be assessed for epilepsy at that stage. I had a scan, I was assessed, and they came back to me with saying this was a non-epileptic, or what they call dissociative seizure. And I had no further explanation. They said, okay, if it keeps happening, we may need to consider medication. The only word that was ever thrown around was this could potentially be functional neurological disorder.
Gosh, and how did that feel to be told that?
I was completely shell-shocked. I just felt sort of dismissed. I was like, well, can you not give me some further tests? Because I really don't know what's happening to my body, and this is starting to become really frightening. I can't drive at this state, or I was advised not to drive until we know what was going on. I was scared to be alone. I was scared to get up. I was basically scared to do anything. And that is sort of when everything started to change, because a couple of days after this happened, and me being constantly full of stress hormones and not being able to sleep, I started to really disassociate. So my vision, the best I can explain it, is it felt like I was stuck in a fishbowl and looking outward in 3D. I looked in the mirror, I knew it was myself, but I could basically not recognize me. I later learned that this is called derealization. But at the stage, I didn't know what it was. I was convinced after the seizure and after my vision going all funky, me not being able to feel anything, my vision just being blurry and light sensitive, sound sensitive, floaters, static in my vision. I was convinced I had a brain tumor. Absolutely convinced.
Gosh.
So that is when everything changed, because this is when I started becoming extremely erratic with trying to find an answer, and the amount of things I did to try and heal really sort of the erraticness and the fear really ramped up after this incident.
So tell us a bit more about, that's a lot to go through. You got COVID, your mum got sick, you lost your grandmother, you started having sleep issues. Any thoughts about what the cause of the sleep issues were? What sense do you make of it now?
Now it makes total sense that, it was just constantly being in fight or flight, stress hormones constantly being pumped out, me being hyper vigilant, afraid. It makes total sense now, even nowadays, and I consider myself recovered. The first thing that goes in a stressful period for me is sleep.
Right. Right.
So it does completely make sense. But back then it was extremely difficult to deal with, not just to deal with the symptoms, but I think everyone knows how it feels to have a sleepless night and to need to function. But having sleepless nights for months without a break, you start to get extremely non-functional. Let's call it that.
Absolutely. I can remember as a child being on holiday and getting sick, and just one night, I think, of not sleeping. I remember waking up in the morning and feeling delirious. So I can imagine if this was going on, that is going to affect your functioning. So tell us, what's the next part of the story that you want to tell?
So, I mean, the next few months are almost a blur for me because I was in this really disassociated state. So I had this sort of like, in my mind, all I want to do is to bloody fix myself. That was my goal. But the way I went about it, the little brain power that I had, is I spent researching constantly, and anything that had some sort of backing, I would try it. So it started sort of off with me going to every specialist there is, from cardiology, where I was then diagnosed with POTS officially, to sort of a sleep psychiatrist who was trying to help me with my sleep issues, to neurology, who was trying to help me manage whatever was happening, because a lot of my symptoms were neurological. And I wasn't getting a lot of answer with these. All I was getting was more and more and more heavy duty medication. So at that stage, a couple of months after the seizure, I was probably on 8 or 9 prescriptions, from antidepressants to anticonvulsants, antipsychotics, heart medication, steroids, you name it. I was on so many things. And they all sort of just came with side effects. So I didn't really feel much better. But the medication was just giving me more and more trouble, to the extent that I couldn't tell anymore what was long COVID or what was side effects from medication. So when I couldn't really get the answers from the specialists I had hoped, I was turning to more alternative medicines. So nutritional therapy, functional medicine, acupuncture, osteopathy, homeopathy, even stuff like Reiki. I was honestly, anything, I would try it in an absolute fearful and desperate attempt to get better.
Yeah, and that's pretty common. I recognize I went down a similar path, and I'm sure other people can relate to that you kind of try all these things. And did any of those things help at all?
Funny enough, some of these things would help me for a day or two, and then I would revert, and I think this is sort of a placebo effect, feeling, especially when it was like someone really caring, who would like listen to me and try to like reassure me and take away my fear. I would always feel better for a day or two, but then I would just revert to the same pattern again.
And tell me a bit more about that pattern. What's the pattern?
Constant researching.
Okay.
Constant focus on symptoms, staying in what I call bad neighborhoods, Reddit, Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. And they are like, if anyone knows the CFS community, they are a very gloomy bunch. And it wasn't much different in the long COVID community. So I was in all these groups: CFS, long COVID, chronic illness. None of them were really recovery focused. They were all just complaining about their misery. And that just sort of spurs it on, because there were people in there saying, oh, no, that's it now. You will forever stay like this, and you will only get worse. Or the best you can hope for is to manage this. But, I was 29ish at the time, 28, 29. And to hear that my life was over, that I would never have a family, that I could bin my career, or, I used to love to travel, that I could bin all of this, that just put me in such an anxiety spiral.
Yeah.
That like I was certain I would not have a future, and that was the stage I became suicidal. Very,
Right.
very suicidal. So my partner at the time, he had to physically drop me off at his parents when he went to work because it was not safe to leave me alone.
Right. Gosh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it does strip you away of everything. I mean, before all this started, I was a competitive weightlifter. I love to travel. I have a very bubbly personality, so I was very social and everything. And I felt like this illness stripped all these layers from me, that I could not recognize anymore who I was. And I thought to myself, what is the point to live like this? So in my mind, I was constantly setting myself like goals. Okay, if I'm not better by this time, I'll find a way to end it. Or if I'm not better by this time, I'll, do something stupid. And I lived like this for quite a while.
Gosh, sorry to hear that. And obviously, if anyone is listening and they're feeling the same way, please do talk to somebody. It's really important you do that. And just going back to what you were saying about the CFS communities, it's very sad to me, and I hear this a lot from people I work with, that they are in these communities that can be very negative, and there are recovery focused communities. I have a Facebook group. There are other people who have Facebook groups that are much more positive and exploring what you can do if you've got a condition like ME, CFS, Fibromyalgia, Long Covid, to support your body's healing. And often people say, get out of those groups, go and find a recovery focused group. Very sorry, you were experiencing that. And I can relate, I'm sure other people can relate. I can remember a time when I just felt my life wasn't really amounting to much. So what helped you shift things? You were feeling depressed and suicidal.
So that went sort of on for, I would say, the best part of 2021 and the first half of 2022. At that time, at some point, I just, how should I put it? Like, I was trialing a lot of things, a lot of different supplements, protocols. I went to therapy and all this to address this. And I started like getting a little better, what I call naturally. I was still pretty non-functional at the stage. I had to give up my job for almost a year. But I was sort of, again, I had a little hope. Not in the sense that I would recover, because that hope had been taken away from me at that stage, but that I would get a bit better and that I could manage to live with this condition. That was sort of my stand in mid-2022. So I sort of started getting progressively a tiny bit better, to the point that I was managing to work part-time again. But, the energy it took me to work part-time, I would just be in bed with symptoms for the rest of the day when I came home. So it wasn't really a way to live. And that went on for a long time, I would say, until about the end of 2023. So I did really live like this for a fairly long time, a couple of years. And what happened, so things started to shift in December 2023. So what had happened is, during my time being ill, I had sort of, after all this happened, I had been the idea of brain retraining and the nervous system. I mean, I still believed that there was a point in it, but somehow I believed I was so broken that it wouldn't apply to me. And I think a lot of people have that thought.
Yeah.
But I started to rack on more and more diagnoses as time went in. From what was initially about 20 symptoms grew to almost 50 by the end of 2023. And at that time, I started getting severe reactions to everything I put in my body: supplements, medications, food. And that was the stage where someone said to me, I think you need to see someone to assess you for muscle activation syndrome, which I was told often comes with POTS and CFS and after long COVID. So I went to Germany to spend some time with my family, and my mother made me an appointment with a mast cell specialist in Düsseldorf, Germany. And I went to him and I had really, really extensive testing. he came back to me and said, look, all the markers for mast cell activation syndrome are there. I think you have this disease. There is not very much we can do at this stage. I was already taking antihistamines. The only thing they said we can do is give you a mast cell stabilizer and off you go. And that completely broke me. I was like, how can every system in my body be affected by this? What is so wrong with me that every part of my body is now affected by this illness? I could not believe it, because any normal blood test, any scan I would have would come back normal. The only indication I ever had that something was off was the specialized testing, where all they found is that my histamine levels were high and the DAO enzyme, which breaks down histamine, was low. So they successfully said, okay, right, that's it, we found it. All you can do now is, take these mast cell stabilizers and antihistamine and eat a very, very limited low histamine diet, and off you go. And that completely broke me. I remember being with my aunt and my mother in Germany, coming home from this hospital stay, and I just fell into my mother's arm and I was sobbing like a 5-year-old, saying, Mom, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to live like this. Please kill me. That's what I was saying to her. And it was very, very hard on her to hear me like this. You know, there was me, 31 years old, sobbing that I cannot do this anymore. And funny enough, what then happened, I don't even know how it happened, but I found Nicole Sachs. I can honestly not tell you anymore how I found it. It was probably in one of my research frenzies that I was engaging in constantly. But I found her podcast, The Cure for Chronic Pain. And I was listening to it. And I think the first story I was listening to was with a girl called Lieke from the Netherlands. So she had long COVID, and she was the first long COVID success story on Nicole's podcast. And that gave me a bit of hope, because her symptoms were extremely similar to mine. And I was like, maybe there is something about this whole nervous system thing. You know, I had never completely abandoned it. It sometimes, crossed my mind. And maybe it was worth it to explore this again. So I started binge watching or binge listening Nicole's episodes. And shortly after, I found a channel by Dan Buglio, Pain for You. And again, he was talking about it in such plain language that it was really easy to understand. And again, I just started to binge listen to these. And one funny thing then happened. I listened to another recovery story on his page. It was also about long COVID. And after this, I had a symptom-free day.
Wow.
And I was like, I can't believe this was happening. But it was really not for long. Maybe it was half a day, and it reverted back. But I was like, come on, this doesn't make sense. A structural illness does not behave that way.
Yeah.
So at that stage, I decided to pay a bit more attention to this and research this a bit more. So I was really, really spending most of my time just listening to episodes, researching what they call TMS, or mind-body syndrome. And I started to believe, I was like, maybe there is another way to go about this recovery than rigid brain retraining, because this is really not for everyone, and it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So I just started sort of like following these two, and I started feeling a little better. So I had even sometimes just minutes without a symptom, or I would go out and walk and suddenly didn't have symptoms. It was very strange. But then something happened about 3-4 weeks later. For the first time in years, I had a PEM flare. So extreme fatigue to the point that I couldn't get up. And I was lying on sofa, called in sick at work for probably 8 or 9 days. And then I was like, oh, bloody hell, maybe I was too happy too early. And then again, I watched an episode by Dan Buglio while I was lying on the sofa feeling sorry for myself, where he said, okay, just try and live your life and, react to the symptoms well, and you will see them shift. And that was the moment where I decided, even though I was fatigued, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk. And I walked for 30 minutes, and the next morning the PEM was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. That was, I think this was the proof, or the little proof, that I needed to really pursue this work. So what I did then is I found myself, I wanted help on this journey. So I found myself a therapist here in the UK who was SERPA trained. So SERPA is an organization here in the UK where sort of therapists, sometimes physios or doctors can train in the mind-body approach. So I found myself a therapist and started seeing her every week. And I started journaling every single day the way Nicole teaches, and to really unearth all those limiting beliefs, all those experiences I had in childhood, and, to talk about my character traits and everything. And slowly but surely, I started seeing a change. It was very subtle at first, but my capacity started to extend. From one day to the other, I just decided I'm going to bin the low-histamine diet. I'm just going to eat everything. That was just like an impulsive decision that I did. And I know if someone's listening, that doesn't work for everyone. So please be careful with this. But I just decided to do this. And I had severe reactions for a few days, and then it stopped, and I could suddenly eat everything again. It was mind-blowing, and that's what set me on the trajectory to heal. I would really say it was Nicole Sachs' approach and Buglio. So I had to borrow several things from different people and sort of make this healing journey my own. But this started this recovery journey a year and 3 months ago now. So 2024 was very much an up and down, a constant up and down, because everyone who goes on such a journey, you will know it is not easy to journal about your traumas, your fears, all the things you feel like ever went wrong in your life. It is a very, very difficult journey. But for me, it became something that was more than just recovery from chronic symptoms. It made me realize the amount of trauma I was holding on to. If you would have asked me previously, all I would have said is I had a great childhood. And that is not wrong. I had a great mother, I had a great grandmother, a great aunt. I had a great childhood, but I also had a lot of trauma that was going on in my childhood, in my teenage years, even in my adulthood. And that was all sort of, exacerbated by the character traits I had developed as a result of these traumas. So I was constantly very hard on myself. I was a raging perfectionist. I had tendencies to overwork, to people please, I had basically no boundaries. I had a track record of abusive relationships with men. And I never thought it affected me, but my father was absent in my childhood, and I later had my grandfather walk out of the family, never to contact me again. So there was a lot of things in my childhood that went wrong, and it was the first time I actually ever acknowledged this and started to work with it.
Right, and so thank you, because that's what I was going to ask you, only if you wanted to say, to just elaborate, which you've just done. And just, you've covered quite a lot there, and there's a few important things in what you said. Number one, you developed an understanding of what might be going on. And I really liked what you said about just recognizing that there were periods where you'd feel better, and that would make you think, okay, well, it can't be structural if suddenly I'm feeling better from listening to a podcast. And that's really important, because often people understand why they feel worse. Sometimes they'll recognize, oh, actually, I've had a stressful period, so that explains why I'm feeling worse. But they have periods of feeling better, and they don't always connect the dots and realize, oh, actually, I'm feeling better because something's shifted in me. I'm just feeling more relaxed. I'm just feeling more regulated. And they notice a change in energy. And I think it's really important to start connecting those dots. And so you started recognizing, that you'd experienced trauma. You recognized some of the character traits that didn't help. And I think that's really important, because these things can create dis-ease in our body. And if we repeat them often enough, that dis-ease can result in disease. You had that understanding. I'm guessing you shifted some of those things. So tell us a bit about how you managed that.
So, I mean, this is an ongoing journey, I've got to be honest. So a lot of the patterns that I had developed as coping mechanisms were there for 30 years of my life. So I still go to therapy. I'm still quite open about this, because it is not so much, I'm almost chronic, well, I'm chronic symptom free, and I'm almost symptom free. They only pop up once in a while when I have a stressful period. But I've unearthed quite a lot of things, and it's taking me some time to work through it. But I can say that I started quite early on, for the first time in my life, to set boundaries with people in my life. And I actually had to lose people on this journey for sort of my own well-being. And it was like, this journey was for me, I would say, for the first 6-7 months of 2024 was a constant up down. So I would take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, but the overall trajectory was upward. So I went to therapy. At the beginning, it was really focused on learning everything about mind-body, about TMS, trying to sort of find these like core issues that may have gotten me into this place sort of in the first place. And it made me realize actually that I had actually had symptoms as a child. So even before I had like my big crashes, my body was speaking to me before it was yelling. And I couldn't recognize this, but I can, for example, say I was diagnosed with asthma when I was 2 or 3 years old. I now do not need asthma medication. So make of that what you want. That was never sort of an intended thing to happen. But, my asthma is in remission, it's gone away. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, I had asthma. I was often having stomach aches as a child. I had frequent infections. So this was something like, I was always that sick kid. I always had something going on, but I never connected the dots. It was just like that. It was the normal for me. So I recognize now that my body was screaming or like talking to me like probably 20, 30 years prior to my big crashes. So that was a helpful insight to sort of make the connecting dots to all those issues that happened in my life. But yeah, it was then sort of the dismantling of those beliefs is something ongoing. But yes, when I started to make changes to prioritize myself, my well-being, to set boundaries, and actually one of the most important things, to take the urgency and the fear away, I really started to see shifts. And what I really needed at the time was, obviously I had quit all sort of bad neighborhoods. I was in no more groups, but I was really longing for community. So I was starting to go to more positive recovery places, and I started meeting some people who were either recovered or were also like using this mind-body approach. And that was about May, June last year. I started to make my own WhatsApp group. And this is an absolute amazing group. To all my all my group people listening here, I love you all. I'm really proud of all of us. So we have seen amazing shifts in this group, and we help coach each other and help each other get through it. So community was extremely important, not the fear mongering, but the actually being hopeful, seeing a future, and helping each other through the bad days. So that was huge on my journey. And it was really, last year was for me all about rebuilding and dismantling fears, because in this process of illness, I had become afraid of everything in my life, from driving my car to standing in the shower. I had really, really rigid evening routines because I was so afraid to sleep. And I thought this was the only way that I was, ever going to get some sleep. It didn't work, but, I got so stuck in almost OCD-like behaviors. And this took me a long time to dismantle.
Amazing. So you started last year noticing the shifts, and what is it you noticed in your body?
I just started noticing it was sometimes not even that sort of noticeable, but I just started, oh, I didn't actually have any pot symptoms today. Or look, I went out tonight because one of the things I was afraid of is going out in the evening because I thought it would ruin my sleep. But it started sort of with confronting my fears. So I went out tonight to see a friend. And even though, I may have had a bit of insomnia after this, I didn't care. I was happy. I had a great time. So I started noticing these things, and I started to notice that when I was engaged in something with my friends or in hobbies, that actually I had no symptoms. So it was amazing to see. So I started to see like my body became my own proof. So I started to see those shifts. Some symptoms were more stubborn. They were lingering. Some disappeared very quickly. So I just started to notice across the board that, I had more capacity. My sleep didn't return for quite a while, but I started to sort of, sleep half an hour more. Or I started to sort of regain the ability to take a nap. Or, like a hot shower didn't like end up with me being in bed for hours after. So it was all these subtle changes. So I know there are people, they, do a brain retraining program or they read a book and they're cured. It was absolutely not like this for me. So it was a very, very tough journey. But the whole trajectory constantly was upward. So by the second half of the year, I still had a couple of lingering things, but the majority of my things were gone. They were mostly gone, and they would only come back when I was like really stressed. But I didn't like welcome them. I tried to like shift my perspective on them. So when I had symptoms, I was trying to look inward and see, okay, what are you trying to tell me? What has bothered you today? Let's go to the pages and journal it out, and then have some compassion and be as unbothered by them as possible. In the beginning, they still stuck around for a few days and then went. But the longer and the more work I was doing around sort of like staying unbothered, sometimes they would dissipate within an hour or two. And the periods just of being symptom free became longer and longer. So I can say for sort of the last few months, none of my issues are chronic anymore. Nothing I have is chronic anymore. I do get glimpses of them, and my nervous system remains a little bit sensitive. But I see this as normal because it takes some time to recover from this. But now I am not afraid. I now know this will just get better in time.
Amazing. And it's great to hear that. It's great to hear that that's where you've got to. And, that's a story that, some people tell, as you say, some people make dramatic recoveries, but some people it is more gradual. But when you start seeing more of the good stuff, you kind of know that you're on track. So, with the benefit of hindsight, Vanessa, what would you say to yourself back then, when you first got sick with either with the
Yeah.
ME/CFS in 2016 or with long COVID? What would you say to yourself when you experienced those quite significant symptoms, lost, not being able to sleep, etc., 50 symptoms, as you said?
I mean, I hated hearing this back then, right? But I would say to just relax a bit and, to not immediately assume the worst. I hated this back then. I would have probably punched someone in the face if they would have told me to relax. But I really think like to take a step back, relax, and like go inwards and actually see what is going on. Is there a way I could like soothe myself right now? Is there a way I could calm my system and to actually not be afraid of the symptoms because they are messenger? And I always say to people, get medically checked out for anything that is going on because this is important. Not everything is TMS. But when they do not find anything, then believe it and actually approach this work because, nothing will happen by seeing another 10 specialists. And to not knock sort of emotional discovery, So if someone would have said to me that, my emotions or my mind could be involved in that, I would have thought they would have told me that I make this up, or that
Yeah.
it's all in my head, and I would have not liked this. And it is not in your head. The symptoms are real, but your brain and your nervous system, they play a part.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the most important. And there's actually another thing I would like to bring up, Simon, if that's okay. So I really, throughout that journey, because I had a lot of negative experiences with medication, I really started demonizing it. But I actually, towards sort of the latter part of my recovery last year, I started using medication as a crutch, not as a sort of, not as a fix. But, I noticed, for example, that when I would take antihistamine over the counter, that I would be a bit like more stable, and then I could sleep better. And then I started to think, I used to be on 4 antihistamines a day and I wasn't stable. But if I can take this little pill and give me sort of a better chance at retraining my nervous system and calming myself, then surely this is a good thing. And that is sort of the like where my mindset shifted a lot, like from demonizing the medical approach to actually using all the tools that I have for recovery to my advantage.
Amazing. Yeah, no, so that sounds like you shifted to a pragmatic approach.
Yes.
Is there a book that you'd recommend to people?
There's actually a couple. So I would go back to the OG, Dr. John Sano. He has amazing books. So they were one of the first ones that I've read. So there is Healing Back Pain, and most importantly, I think the Mind-Body Prescription. So I love these. And there's another book which I think is really great. This is Alan Gordon's. I can't remember the title right now, but it is amazing. So it is written in really plain language. And I know he talks about pain in his book, but someone's pain is someone else's long COVID or CFS. It really
Yeah.
does not matter. So I think these would be sort of the main books I would recommend, but I have read a lot on the topic since. So how life looks like now for me is I'm actually like I live and breathe this work now. So through my own WhatsApp recovery group, I help people on their journey, and I have actually just started training as a coach myself. So
Amazing.
I hope that once I'm done with my qualification and have a bit more experience, that I can actually start helping people on their journey. But it is really something that fills my heart with joy and with hope. And it has really solidified my own recovery to help people through it. And it is a wonderful feeling to be of service.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've talked about this. There's a film which I recommend. It's with Robin Williams called Patch Adams. It's a true story of a man who took himself off to psychiatric hospital because he was suicidal. But when he was in the hospital, he realised that he felt better when he was helping other people, and so he trained as a doctor. And it's quite a, obviously it's got Robin Williams. It's quite a funny film, but it's also quite deeply moving. I won't say too much about it, but so I totally get that. And the book is called The Way Out. I was quickly looking it up.
Oh, The Way Out, yes.
It's a great book. It's a very entertaining book. So absolutely, they are all great recommendations. I've read all those books that you've mentioned.
There's also another one which I actually would recommend, and that's the new book by Nicole Sachs.
Okay.
So Mind Your Body. It's also great. So I'm a huge lover of journaling, and I'm actually a part of the group expert team in Nicole Sachs's group. So I help people out there. So you may recognize my name from the
amazing,
group.
amazing.
So,
And funnily enough, I was responding to someone's post this morning where she was talking about Nicole Sachs' approach. And although I do journaling and I know a little bit about Nicole Sachs, I really liked that framework that she uses. I don't know if you can remember it off the top of your head, the 3 bits that just, do you want to tell us what they are?
Yes. So it's basically like the first approach is sort of like understanding what is happening, so understanding the brain science, then using sort of the journaling to excavate all, those emotions, and then the third one is patience and kindness for yourself. So it's a huge one. I was not always kind to myself, and it's still something that I'm working on, but you really do need patience, and you need some self-love on this journey. And if I'm still not one of those people that can thank the illness. I still wish it hadn't happened, I'm honest.
Yeah.
But I can see the value in it now, because I'm becoming a completely different person. For the first time in my life, I live more mindfully, and actually think about my own well-being and safety first.
Amazing. Any final top tips for someone who is where you were, all that time ago?
Yeah. I would say we all done it back then, but I get messages constantly. What exactly is it? Like, walk me through a day of exactly what you did to recover. And I understand that this comes out of desperation, but you really need to find your own path in this. Even within the mind-body approach, there is a lot of different modalities. So I would say, don't try them all at once. Pick something, stick with it, and see how it goes. And don't be discouraged if it doesn't work. I mean, I am proof that sometimes you just need to look for something else, but that there is something for everyone.
Amazing. And what have you got to look forward now? What's in your future?
I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out. It's still a lot of rebuilding my life at the moment, and actually really, like, I've never asked myself this in the past. I would often just go, with something that was expected of me, or something that society deemed acceptable. But now, for the first time in my life, I'm actually asking myself, what is it that I really want? And I mean, I'm asking myself that, but I have started a new job a couple of months ago, which I really, really like. So I work in business development at the moment. And obviously I'm doing a coaching qualification on the side at the moment. So I really feel grateful and excited for my career. I've gotten a dog last year, which was a lifetime dream of mine. And for the first time, I actually believe that, I can have a family. I can travel the world again. So I wouldn't say there is too much concrete plans, but I know now that whatever it is, I can do it.
Amazing. Well, it's been fantastic to hear your story and to talk to you and hear about the insights that you've gained along the way. Did you say you got a dog?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. What sort of dog?
I've got a Cavapoo, and her name is Maple.
Maple. Okay, that's very nice. So, listen, thank you very much, Vanessa, for sharing your story. I will link all the things that you mentioned below the video, and I'll add your details as well so people can get in touch if they'd like.
Yes.
So thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Simon.
You're welcome. Bye for now.
Bye.